Perfect, okay. So I would like to call to order the September 30th, 2020 joint Board of Education meeting with the CBOC. I hope everyone joining us tonight is doing well and that your families are safe and in good health. We will be having public comment today, regular public comment, and then also for the specific items for the 3 items that we have on the agenda. I want to remind the public, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I would like to remind everybody how we're going to be engaging in Zoom, and then we're going to be doing our Pledge of Allegiance. So I want everybody to remember that when you want to share public comment, it's going to be live. All board members and the superintendent will be on video throughout the meeting. Staff members are also present. Members of the CBOC are present and will be on video when speaking as well. In order to comment on an agenda item at tonight's meeting, please make sure that you raise your hand on Zoom by pressing the raise your hand button on the Zoom app or by pressing *9 by telephone when the board reaches the item for which you want to comment. If you're calling in with your phone, please make sure you press *6 to unmute your phone. When we get to the item, a member of district staff will call your name. Your hand must be raised before, or we're going to have comments. There's not going to be a time limit on it because it is a small meeting, but we are going to have one comment after the other as we usually do. In order to be recognized to speak, please make sure that you're using a first and a last name. Thank you. And I'll share the same instructions in Spanish. Do we also have translation for this one available or no? Interpretation?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Para hacer un comentario sobre un artículo en la agenda, se le pide al público que por favor levante su mano al presionar el botón de levantar la mano en Zoom o al presionar *9 por teléfono cuando lleguemos al artículo para el cual usted quiere hacer su comentario. Si está llamando por teléfono, por favor presione *6 para prender el micrófono de su teléfono. Cuando lleguemos a ese artículo de la agenda, un personal del distrito escolar llamará su nombre y para ser reconocido para comentar, por favor, use un primer nombre y un apellido. Gracias. Y también quiero anotar que puede cambiar el idioma al poner interpretación para escucharlo en español en Zoom. So I want to note that you can change the interpretation to have comments in Spanish or English by pressing the interpretation button on Zoom. Okie dokie. So can we please have roll call, Mr. Duffy?
Sorry, even before we start that, President Hernandez-Jarvis, can anybody from staff try to put the CBOC members as panelists so that we can see when they raise their hand to speak? Right now, they're listed as attendees and they're on a different list. And they don't, we cannot see that they've raised their hand and want to speak.
I see. Okay.
I mean,
we're actually watching for that so that if they do come up, we'll be able to mention it. That's actually what I'll be watching tonight.
I mean, but, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, we can see, you can also see, I think as a panelist, if you click on attendee, you'll see who raises their hands. So if you click on participants and then attendees, you can see anybody who has a hand raised.
I can see their names, but I can't see that any option for them to raise their hand.
No, but when they raise their hands, usually the blue hand pops up. One of them just raised their hand, I think, as an example.
But they have to have a tool. They have to be able to
Raise their hand.
they have to be able to punch a button to say raise their
3
hand.
have now raised their hands.
All right, I'm seeing it now, so I'll just shut up.
Okay, there it is. Okay, thank you for checking that.
Thank you, though.
Superintendent Duffy, can we have roll call?
Sure. President Hernandez-Jarvis.
Presente.
Trustee Lara.
Present.
Trustee Panis.
Present.
Trustee Phillips, I don't think is here. Trustee Trustee Cuevas is absent. Student Trustee Garcia Avila.
Present.
See, and I don't see Student Trustee Cotton Blake.
Welcome, Trustee Garcia Avila, and I want to let everyone know that Trustee Cuevas unfortunately is not going to make it. She let us know that she couldn't change another commitment that she had for today with her family, so I just want to make sure that acknowledge that she reached out to let us know that and to share that. And with Trustee Phillips, I'm wondering if Superintendent Duffy can potentially reach out to see if he is going to make it tonight. I hope he can join us. Okay, so thank you. Mr. Gosney, did you want to do roll call as well before we move on?
Sure. Sally DeWitt, I saw her name here.
Yeah, she's here.
Okay. I am here. Maisha Cole,
And if they just raise their hand, we'll be able to confirm.
okay, but are they?
Maisha Cole is not present. I don't see her on the list.
Okay. Lorraine Humes. Okay.
She's present.
Anton Younghair,
He's present.
Cameron Moore, I saw his name. Ken Burns is not here. Guadalupe Anlana, I saw her as a participant. And John Anderson, I saw his name on there as well.
Yes,
So we-
Dr. John Anderson. Okay,
So we have 7 out of our 9.
great. Thank you, Mr. Gosney. Okay, so now can we please do the Pledge of Allegiance? And I apologize, that was our second opening procedure item and I overlooked it. I'm sorry. So if we can stand up to join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay. So let's take a look at our fourth opening procedure item, agenda review and adoption. Are there any changes that anybody would like to make? Board members, CBOC members? Is there a motion to approve the agenda, to adopt the agenda as it is?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Gosney. I second that motion. Can we please have a vote?
Hernandez, yes.
Lara, yes.
Gosney, yes.
And Hernandez-Jarvis, yes. And Trustee Garcia Avila? I don't think I heard you if you said it.
Garcia Avila, yes.
Thank you. So the motion passes unanimously with Mr. Gosney, with Trustee Garcia Avila, and with Trustee Cuevas and Trustee Phillips absent. So next we have public comment, item 8.5. So again, for members of the public, please make sure you raise your hand on Zoom by pressing the raise your hand button. And if you're calling in, press *9 so that your hand can be raised, and then *6 when your name is called to unmute your phone.
So far, we have one public comment at this point, Joanna Pace.
Great.
And she
Thank
can
you.
speak now.
Good evening, board and CBOC members. This is Joanna Pace representing Public Core. I just want to point out for those of you meeting tonight that for this member of the public at least, I can only see 8 tiles of panelists. So for this member of the public, if I want to be reminded who's on the CBOC, if I want to help with their name, there's no way for this member of the public to do that. Whereas if we were meeting normally, I could just look at who's seated at the table. So it is a drawback to this kind of joint meeting that it's on Zoom, but you do not have the CBOC members of panelists. We can't see them, we can't see their names. And just so you know, as this member of the public at least has no opportunity to click participants to see names. I assume that's some kind of setting you have because you cannot see me. I'm somehow, I can't just click participants to see who's on the Zoom call. Thank you.
So
We have
and
one more hand that's been raised. It's one of the CBOC members.
could you hold on a second, Dr. Wold?
Mhm.
Thank you. So Mr. Duffy, if you can, or Mr. Jordan, whoever is the host of the meeting, because if we have it as a webinar, I don't know if participants have the ability to click on participants in this mode, or if they're just shown the screen that we have. But maybe we can consider having the CBOC join us panelists. Because if it's a Zoom webinar, I think that they may not have the same controls that we have as panelists. So why don't we have the next public speaker go, and then we can consider that, because I think that will help with that transparency. Thank you.
Okay, the next public speaker is Mac Moore. And he can unmute.
Yeah, so I just want to echo that comment. I think it's inappropriate that the CBOC members are in a sort of lesser position in this meeting. So I believe this is a joint meeting and we should have full participation. So I just echo the comments that were previously made by Ms. Pace, that I think this meeting would be more appropriately set up with us as panelists. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next one is Anton Younger, and I'm looking to see if I can start promoting people.
Great. Thank you.
And Anton is unmute. He can unmute now.
Tony, are you promoting panelists, or do you need me to ask Mr. Jordan?
I'm doing it right now.
Okay.
And I think someone else is too, because I think half of them are in transit right now as we speak.
Mr. Jordan is doing some, I think the ones that he knows.
Yeah. I think we've got everybody on their
Lorraine,
way.
I think you got to get Lorraine.
Got her.
Thank you. And as we're getting more populated right now, I think we have one more person that was supposed to have their public comment right now. If I can ask everybody to keep their microphones off until they're recognized by either Mr. Gosney or myself when we're having the discussion, so we don't have as much background noise, and so we can take turns. So I'm going to
There are
mute.
no more public speakers at this point.
Okay.
I'm
Thank
sorry,
you.
what happened to Anton Young here? He had his hand up. Did he take it down, or was he?
Is he on here?
He's on now as a panelist.
Okay, but he had his hand up to speak.
Yeah.
I see him. Can
So
we?
he can unmute.
I did speak. I supported the prior two folks and indicated I could not see the participant, but I'm happy now.
Thank you. And I don't think we had heard your comment, or maybe if you had it, I didn't hear it. So thank you for sharing it again. Okay. So with that being said, if we don't have any other public speakers lined up, looks like we don't have any more. So we can get to our discussion items. The first item, I'm going to be facilitating it, and then Mr. Gosney will facilitate the second item, and I will facilitate the third. So the first discussion item is status of program management plan.
So I'd like to Melissa Payne presenting tonight, and I just want to thank her for all her effort and hard work in putting this plan together over the last couple of years.
Mr.
Yep.
Free, sorry to interrupt. Could you get a little bit closer to the microphone? It's hard to hear you. I know that you have a mask on, and we want to read that for sure, but if you can get a little bit closer so we can hear the microphone.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Just wanted to acknowledge Ms. Payne's work over the last year, 2 years on this program management plan and dedication, and she spent many days and evenings putting this together, and it's for the betterment of the department, and so she'll be presenting tonight.
Thank you.
Good evening, board trustees, CBOC members, student trustees, superintendent, and community. My name is Melissa Payne, and I am the Director of Contracts. And tonight, it's really my honor to be able to share with you an update on the bond program management plan. So the purpose of the plan is to document the internal controls that properly implement the district's policies, safeguard its assets, provide compliance with laws and regulations, and ensure the timely and accurate financial information. We believe that this plan is collaborative, and as it was developed through a process of listening and learning. We believe the plan is supplemental and will outline the will and the way that we manage the program every day. We believe that this plan demonstrates the ongoing implementation and continuous improvements that the community expects and that they deserve. And we also believe that this plan represents an investment and enables accountability to ensure that long-term return on investment as we continue to implement this program. And so with that, I'd really like to share with you some of the features of the plan. This plan was uniquely crafted for our district in active consultation with the community. During the development of the plan, there was a dedicated web page that highlighted the monthly updates that were presented at Facilities Committee and with our CBOC partners. Drafts were displayed, public comments were encouraged. This has been an iterative process, and as Mr. Freeze mentioned, it's been going on for a little over a year, and it's been a process that has valued diverse perspectives and different areas of expertise. It's important to know that this plan is supplemental. This plan does not intend to replace any board policy or any district contract requirements. Instead, this plan provides supplemental information that really outlines the day-to-day internal controls and the management of the program. This plan strives to ensure consistency of implementation and clear guidelines that are to be followed. This plan outlines the organizational structure, which is really the foundation of our program. We acknowledge that in time, the people and the job titles may change, but the structure that we've put in place, we think that it's important that the role of approver versus initiator, the development of teams within the specialized areas, they must remain the same. Our plan details the resources and the supporting documents that are available to our team in an effort to ensure additional accountability. And with that, for those that may have gotten a chance to see it, the plan is about 299 pages. And so I'm going to take a couple of minutes to really highlight what I think are some of the key features of the plan. The plan begins with a narrative that's organized into 4 different sections. Those sections are program and operations, which detail things like the governance structure, conflict of interest, communication. Then it transitions into a fiscal narrative that really describes the process of budgeting, encumbrances, invoice processing, and reporting, which transitions into the administrative section, which goes into great detail about the procurement and contracting. And then it concludes with the project management section, which really talks about the general features of a project from initial conception all the way through completion and certification. Each one of these narratives has a number of resources that are documented through the appendices that support that documentation. Some of the appendices that I'd really like to highlight tonight, which I think demonstrate some of the true principles of our plan, start with our financial reports. This is probably one that I'm most proud of because these financial reports were developed in collaboration with our CBOC partners. There's a monthly suite of financial reports that are provided at both community meetings, and they are a detailed monthly identification of the expenditures, the commitments, and the remaining project budget balance. We have one report over here on the left-hand side, which it's a 2-sheeter, but if you double-side it, it's a single sheet of paper that identifies the bond program's financial history over 2 decades, dating back to fiscal year 01. The next report that's in the middle is probably become my favorite, and it was really the idea of one of our CBOC partners, and it's a variance report that we provide monthly, which identifies all of the changes from last month to the new month. So in a quick snapshot, you can see what the burn rate was for the program, any changes to revenue. I'll share some more details a little bit later in the presentation, but this happens to be the snapshot from last month. And it indicates the $23 million that we received from the state in additional funds and the deposit of those dollars into our fund. And lastly, on the right-hand side is the summary of the multi-year cash flow report that we have on a project basis all the way down to the cost code level. We've implemented a multi-year cash flow through the subsidiary ledger of our audited financial system, Munis, and it's how we know in any moment where we are today and where we are headed in the future. Another one of the key features of our plan are the workflow diagrams. We really put these together because we thought it was a good way to demonstrate the process and then where the insertion of the forms that we use in the administration of our program fit into the process. For example, you can see here, this is the workflow when there's a proposed expenditure against a project budget. And so you can see, for example, number 3 here corresponds to the form, which is the project multi-year budget amendment and transfer form, which is 5B in the appendix. And so in full transparency, we're sharing with our community the process as well as the forms and where those forms take place throughout the process. This is probably the document that is the true foundation of our program and the one that has changed the most over the last 5 years. This started as a document that was used to identify the steps of the procurement process for any proposal that was received. It has evolved because the way that our program is run, it is run where a management level approval from facilities and fiscal and procurement are all working together to document the approvals and the verification of any proposed expenditure before it can move forward. This form has the ability to indicate the project manager or department approval. It has a way of indicating how this proposed expenditure would go across the multi-fiscal years. There's detailed information about the procurement. And then there's a number of items down here that are used to demonstrate the internal controls, the verification of license and DIR registration, if there's retainage, availability of funding and confirmation that the budget is in place for this item. And because we believe one of the features of this plan is that it has consistency in its implementation and is ongoing, there are instruction forms for a number of the forms that we use, such that as we have new team members that may be joining, they can quickly get up to speed on how we are implementing this program. This results in a multi-approved and documented confirmation of any proposed expenditure against the bond program, and then it's uploaded into our financial system. So at any time, if anyone had a question about an expenditure against the bond program, they could go to our audited financial system and find this completed form with all of the documented approvals available. We think that it's not enough to have forms and legally drafted templates that we use. We believe that there is so much value in providing education to the community and to our team. So these are 2 examples of some of the resources that have been created and are used internally so that we can build the capacity of all of our team members so that they understand not just what they need to do, but why they're doing it. So for example, on the left-hand side, this is a construction services contract value threshold. based on the public contract code, the civil code, a number of codes, and then just district policies. There are contract value thresholds at which different types of requirements become required. Our contract templates are drafted that way. They've been approved by legal and they're the only ones we use. But instead of just saying to our team, this is the form to use, we're providing continued education and resources so they understand why there are differences. On the left-hand side is another resource that was created to really support team, and this is how we put a project out to bid. Again, there are a number of different codes and requirements that speak to specific timelines in the procurement process and what must be done. But what we did was we took that information and put it into an accessible checklist, again, to build the capacity within our team so that everybody knows what we're doing and why we're doing it. This is a demonstration of the collaboration of the plan. I think the true strength of what we've been doing over the last couple of years is that we're not doing it independently and we're not doing it in silos. The document on the left-hand side is a cost code explanation and an example. This is based on a collaboration of our fiscal coordinator and our project team, because our fiscal coordinator has the responsibility to ensure that when an item is coded, that it's coded appropriately. If we have consistent in our account code, then we'll have consistency in our reporting. But in order for our fiscal team to better understand how to code all of the nuances of construction, there was an active collaboration between our fiscal team and our project team to really understand all of the different components of construction. Again, another resource that we believe really helps ensure consistent implementation. On the right-hand side is what we call our payment approval form. This is a collaboration between fiscal and contracts. If somebody approves an invoice, they're not approving it in isolation. They understand in approving that invoice what the contract looks like. Are there multi-funding sources? Are there multi-years associated with this contract? What is the remaining balance? This enables the invoice approval process to also help indicate any potential forecasting needs that we might have. Having this information available and something that regularly becomes part of our implementation practice, I think has really helped align our day-to-day controls. And then lastly, I share these two items, which are also included in our plan. And these are both based on collaboration between staff and our CBOC partners. The item on the left-hand side is an audit guide resource, which is included in the appendix of our bond program management plan. It identifies the master list items 1 through 112, BLS recommendation number, and then a brief description of the audit recommendation. The last column identifies the location in the program management plan that's the demonstration of that recommendation. And you can see here, for example, on number 14, this was a VLS recommendation that there be budget verification documentation. So what we've indicated here is that in the narrative, it's in the fiscal section, 1.3.2, and it's in the appendix in the workflow and forms 1.5.2 and 1.6.3. We thought it was important that audit guides be developed and that they actually be included in our plan, because our implementation of the recommendations isn't something that gets completed. It's part of our daily practice and our ongoing implementation of controls. And lastly, here on the right-hand side is an acronym list, because as we are super engaged in the alphabet soup of our industry, we may use acronyms from time to time. And so this is an acronym list that identifies some of the abbreviations that are used, and one that you commonly hear, DSA, the Division of State Architect. This is our acronym list, and it's also an appendix in our plan. So what does this all mean? We have a plan, we have our daily internal controls, and there's a program that we're running each and every day. Well, what I'd like to do before we conclude is I'd really like to highlight to you some of the value that we have found in having a plan that's implemented and a team that's all aligned and on the same page. The first I shared with you briefly, and that was the suite of the monthly financial reports. And I'd be remiss if I didn't just mention it one more time that these reports represent 2 decades from fiscal year 01 to present of the bond financial data into a monthly reconciled report that is provided in multiple formats. The second is since the adoption of the site budget authorization form, which was introduced to the board in October of 2016, the district has returned over $8.7 million to the fund balance in project budget savings for legacy projects and 2016 facility master plan projects. And then the one that I'm probably most excited about today, because I have breaking news out of the state allocation board meeting that was held earlier today, is that our district has received over $135 million in the last 10 years from the state facility program. And most recently, as was mentioned, we received the $23.4 million from Pinole through active consultation with the state, because that application originally went in for $16 million and we were able to receive an award of $23.4 million. And just this afternoon, we received approval for a number of CTE, Career Technical Education Facility grants. This is based on a program that the state provided, and it was really conceived to be a grant program for future CTE facilities. But in reviewing the legislation, the way that it was written, it didn't clarify if it had to be grant or reimbursement. So we went back and provided detailed applications for the CTE dedicated facilities that were built when we rebuilt El Cerrito High School and De Anza High School. And this afternoon, an additional $4.7 million was approved, and we'll be working closely with the state over the next 12 months to fulfill the requirements to receive those reimbursement funds, which will continue the furtherance of our program. So we believe the strength of this plan lies in our ability to implement the plan. And so accordingly, we see this plan as a living document, one that's intended to be revised and updated, one that's not perfect today, but thanks to the support of many will be even better when we bring it forward to the board, which is anticipated to be October 21st, and ask the board to accept it. This ongoing process is one that we plan to bring an annual certification to the board every year to confirm that this plan is up to date and that it is still in use. And we believe that that is the best return on investment that we can provide to the community, to be transparent about the work that we're doing and the controls that we implement every day to safeguard all of the assets. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you so much, Ms. Payne. And I apologize to the public, my internet connection seems to be unstable right now. I just had that message pop up and my screen is freezing. So if I am disconnected suddenly, if Mr. Gosney and Ms. Letta could facilitate until I can get logged back in. Thank you, Ms. Payne, for the thorough presentation. And I included in the messages before we have public comment to please have staff upload the slides that are missing from the presentation that is published. Thank you. So if we can have public comment first from attendees, and then we can go to a discussion if there's questions or comments from panelists. And because we have a lot more people today who are part of the discussion, if we can have questions and comments from people who have them. If you don't have them, that's okay. We don't have to use the rotation order that we use today. So I'm asking board members and CBOC members, if you can also participate if you have a comment or question, and we're not going to have the official rotation that we have during discussion. So if you have one, just please, you can raise your hand on Zoom, or you can raise your hand in person too, however. And again, if I disconnect, if Trustee Lara and Mr. Gosney could facilitate.
So we have no public comment hands. There are 3 panelist hands that have been raised. In order, I believe it was Lorraine, then Sally, then Don Gosney that raised their hands. And now Trustee Panis as well.
Great, so we can start with Ms. Humes. Thank you.
Start with Lorraine.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Melissa, I do want to thank you for all the work you put into this. It's a fantastic program, you and the people that have helped you. And I know the importance of it, especially when we're talking about the performance audits and the forensic audit with all your policies and procedures. As a CBOC member, I know your financial reports you give us. Could you give us some training in how to use the system on questions that may come up in the financial paperwork that you give us? In other words, how can we use it to best help the CBOC? In the future, maybe we could get some training on it. I appreciate it. Thank you.
The next person with their hand raised was Sally DeWitt.
Thank you, Lauren.
I just want to congratulate Melissa, and I think she did, and her team. You did just a terrific job. I put a plan like this together myself when I was working for Chevron. It took me 5 years, and it's a huge undertaking, and I really, really appreciate it. I have a couple of questions which I have already emailed Melissa. They're kind of late breaking questions, and I don't need to go over them here at this meeting. But Melissa, if we can just, resolve a couple of those issues, then I think all understand, and we can move ahead. But anyway, the bottom line is this is just such a great step forward. So congratulations. Good job, good job, good job.
Next one was Don Gosney.
What a great job you did, Miss Melissa. I know better than most about just how hard you've been working on this, because you and I have to work on so many other things, and I'm always pulling you away from this. And it's a monumental task that you did, and you were up to it. You did a fantastic job. If the board members and staff are paying attention, next time you have a facilities meeting, somebody ought to think about renaming one of our schools after you, because you've done a lot more for the kids in this district than some of the people that we've named these schools after. So, and it should go a long ways towards keeping performance auditors off of our backs. And that is a very, very good thing, because our goal always, if we have a performance audit with effectiveness and results, see how I got that plugged in there, Mr. Wold? But if we have a performance audit, we want it to be just a clean bill of health. And that this will go a long ways towards getting us there. You mentioned about the 130 some odd $million in state awards that we received over the past 10 years. If you were to go back a few years farther than that, you'll see that the number is a lot higher than that, because we had a bond program at the time that we had all these projects that were shovel ready. We had approved plans. We had budgets that had been approved. And so that when programs became available from the state, we were moved to the top of the list. For all intents and purposes, we got 4 or 5 elementary schools for free because we were ready. We had done our hard work, and we were prepared for it. Just a little side note, some of the people here were commenting on the chat room that they want to be able to see the presentations. On the chat, I put down the URL for the entire agenda packet, which includes all of the items as PDFs that you can just click on them and click on the page numbers to be able to pull it up. It's also a downloadable document, so you can archive it and read it when this meeting is over with. Just look on the chat room, the URL is there. Thank you.
Trustee Panis.
Thank you, Mr. Gosney.
Thank you very much. I'm so happy with the work that has been done on this. by the staff, in particular Ms. Payne and Swinnerton. And we had great public participation. I really appreciate that. I think it would serve us all best if there was a complete table of contents at the beginning rather than each section having a table of contents, because I had a hard time finding stuff in here and I'd have to try and guess, well, I wonder if it's in there, I wonder if it's in there, because there was no table of contents at the beginning. And along those same lines, I think we'd really be well served if there was a uniform scheme of numbering for the entire length of the document, because right now, like every subsection is numbered individually. You know, there's probably 50 different instances of page 1 and page 2 in this document. Loved the acronyms list. That was great to have that. I had thought that there was going to be a list of all the public comments that had been submitted and how we dealt with each one, either yes, no, or maybe, or some other way. And I'm just wondering if you have any information about when we'll be able to see that.
So yes, so thank you for the recommendations. Available on the Bond Program Management Plan website now is the list of all of the public comments that were received, and the written response to each one of the public comments indicating how that has been either described or incorporated is something that we hope to present at Facilities Committee and at our CBOC meeting here in early October, which would be in advance of bringing the document forward to the board on October 21st. And I would also be remiss and want to thank everyone for the appreciation. This has really been a collaborative process, and so none of this would have been possible without really the board's support and leadership, without the countless hours of CBOC support and really partnership with staff, all of the hours in the meetings that we've worked together to put this together. And then the incredible team that really I just represent by giving the presentation. And so I want to appreciate and acknowledge everyone here that has been part of this process, and we'll share all of this with our team as well. So thank you for that.
Great, thank you. And just one more quick comment. And thank you so much for passing along the information about the CTE grants. Obviously, we need to do everything we can to support that work, and it's very exciting news. Thank you and the rest of the staff for being so proactive on this. So those are my comments. Thanks.
Okay. Our next hand is student trustee Stephanie Garcia Avila.
Thank you for that presentation, Ms. Payne. I have 3 questions, but I'm just going to go one by one, and then, so my first question is, how will you collaborate with students, families, and community? And if you already do, how so?
So I think that's an excellent question. And one of the things that we've just recently added to the program management plan since kind of the original drafts were presented was the approval of Measure R, which happened in March. And so as we begin the facilities master plan updating process, and there's the community survey that's out, and then the collection of the prioritization committee members, one of the voices that has truly been prioritized is the student voice. So for each one of the high school attendance areas, there are 2 students for the prioritization committee. There's a community survey that's been shared beyond just students and parents, but to the broader community. I guess I would say that I have some cousins that are high schoolers, and I have found that if you want to know how to improve a school, students have real solutions to their experience and valued voices that need to be heard. The philosophy, I think, of our program is that every time we touch a building, we have an opportunity to improve learning. But if we're not hearing from students and families about how to improve the learning, then we're missing the bar. And so I would say in the most next couple of months, that would probably be the biggest opportunity for participation. I hope I answered your question okay.
Yeah, you did. My second question is, I know you talked about the webpage a little bit. So is the webpage for the bond program easily accessible, and how has it been promoted?
So we've been through a monthly update that's been shared at both Facilities Committee and CBOC, and we've always included the web link to that web page on our presentation. One of the other things that we did that we thought was really important in putting together the plan, so we want to make sure that this plan stands the test of time and that it provides the most up-to-date information to everyone that's using it as a resource document. So anytime there was an opportunity to reference another district website in the plan, that's what we did. So instead of saying, this is what the board composition is, we said, to learn more about the board composition, go to this web page. And so I hope that the readers of the plan will find that this plan indeed provides a number of different resources and district web pages that can be support not only in understanding how we do business in the bond program, but I think more globally from a governance structure for our district, or at least that was our intention.
Thank you. And my last question is, how will all the money be managed, and how will y'all make sure that the money goes to the right places?
So the proposal approval cover sheet form is what we use and what is required for any proposal of any dollar amount, which means not a single dollar of bond funds can be spent without the signed and documented approval of the department and the project manager, and then the facilities approver, the contracts approver, and the fiscal approver. The reason why we think that's so important is because each of us is looking at different things within our area of expertise and ensuring that, for example, we're using the appropriate type of funds, we're using the appropriate type of account, and that it's in compliance for the various different legislation or regulations that are within our areas. And so each one of our signatures represents something different. And that's just the hard copy approval. Beyond that, there is also a workflow approval within our financial system, which documents another set and series of approvals that goes beyond just the bond program itself. For example, it goes to the purchasing department, et cetera. And so I'm proud to say that within our team, a dollar isn't spent unless we've all looked at it and approved it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Garcia Avila.
We had one last hand, Trustee Lara.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Payne. This is really excellent. It was clear that your priority was to make it as understandable as possible to everybody when you talked about here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, and then the documentation. I really appreciate all of that work. So I appreciate, your team and the leadership. There's two areas that I want more information about, but I can, I'll send an email with some specific questions. One is the CTE grants for facilities. I'm very interested in the details about that. So I'll, send through an email through Mr. Duffy, and then if I can get that information, that would be great. And then early on, you mentioned something about conflict of interest, and I guess I didn't listen to all the details of but I was just wondering what area that was, what you were referring to in terms of the conflict of interest. And so, again, you don't have to answer it now, but I'm interested in that as well. But thank you so much. This was just great. You did a great job. Thank you.
And just so that you know, we are working on a Friday memo for the CTE news. It just got approved this afternoon at about 5 o'clock. And so we are working on getting a Friday memo with all of those details. And we'd be happy to follow up and provide you the additional details about the conflict of interest.
Great, awesome. Thank you, Ms. Payne. I don't see any other participants with their hands raised. I want to say again, thank you. I think people have really reiterated the most important aspects of this document of the plan. And I think that for me, it really stands out that you identified that to make this document more accessible to the public, you included the language legend so that everybody knows what letter stands for what code and what is it, what is it that they're reading, so that it's not gatekeeping language, but it's actually opening the door to let people in into understanding like what this is about. So I really appreciate that and the effect that that's going to have long term. And I also am really glad and happy to hear that you, the news that you shared about the CTE facilities grant. And if you can, I'm looking forward to reading the Friday memo and seeing what news you have for us. So thank you for sharing that with us. And I'm excited to find out more. And I'm grateful for your work and for the work of your team too, with Mr. Fries, with Mr. Gosney, and everybody else involved. Thank you. So with that, we will wrap up the first discussion item, and I was facilitating this one. Discussion item B2, bond program audits, will be facilitated by Mr. Gosney, Chair of the CBOC.
Thank you very much, President Hernandez-Jarvis. The original scope of this agenda item was to discuss the scope of the bond program performance audit. And should it be compliance only, include effectiveness and results, dual auditors? And since then, that scope has been expanded to include more. Dr. Wold has several presentations on this, some of which have been presented at the board meetings already, but trying to get it all focused here. When he's completed his presentation, the CBOC has a brief little presentation, and then we'll take comments. Dr. Wold, I'll turn things over to you.
Great, thank you. If we can go ahead and just bring up the summary PowerPoint in a moment. Melissa will be presenting most of the PowerPoint. We've had a lot of conversations about what types of audits are required and what types of audits are desired, and what is the difference between each. And so staff is going to walk through and talk about the types of audits that we have. The required audits each year, you're required to do a performance audit and you're required to do a financial audit. Each of those are built in, they can be funded with bond funds. In the past, we've done effectiveness audits and the forensic audit that still has the findings that we're continuing to work through. And an effectiveness audit is an additional type of audit that goes into other types of details. The conversation at the end of the presentation is, what other audits does the district believe are necessary to go forward, and how do we know and when should we be doing those? Staff's opinion, as we go through the presentation, is that we would like to finally, formally finalize all of the findings from the previous audits that have been done, get them reconciled. If there are things that are not completed, that clearly is going to go into the scope to continue. And if there's other areas that are the desire of the board and the community to add in, we build that in and create a third audit that's an effectiveness audit, and then determine whether that can be funded directly with bond proceeds or general fund proceeds. But it's clearly defined so that we're moving forward. With that, we're going to have Melissa kind of go through what we have done with audits and what the options are in this item.
So good evening. So tonight I'll start with sharing information about the 2 annual audits that are required by Proposition 13. The first is the bond financial audit. So the fiscal year 19 audit was accepted by the board and didn't result in any recommendations. The fiscal year 20 audit is currently under contract with Christy White, and work will begin later this year. The second required audit is the bond performance audit. So the fiscal year 19 audit resulted in 2 recommendations, both of which have been fully implemented. And the fiscal year 20 audit is currently not under contract. And as Dr. Wold mentioned, recommendation is to issue a request for proposal. So now I'll transition into some of the additional audits, which is the bond program effectiveness audit, which was also performed by Moss Adams for fiscal years 17, 18, and 19. The audit resulted in 26 cumulative recommendations. And so what I mean by that is that in fiscal year 19, they published a summary of all of the recommendations across the 3 years that remained outstanding, of which there were 26. 24 of those recommendations really spoke to process and procedure. And so that's why one of the appendices of the program management plan includes really an audit guide reference to this program effectiveness audit and the PMP locations that correspond to the demonstration of the implementation of those recommendations. The remaining 2 recommendations relate to the CBOC board policy and the CBOC website. The other report was the Forensic Accounting Investigation Phase 2 report, which was published in September of 2016 and resulted in 112 recommendations. There will be a presentation this evening on the status of the implementation of these recommendations, but essentially to date, there are actually 102 recommendations that have been implemented out of the 112, which results in 10 outstanding recommendations. The remaining recommendations essentially fall into 2 categories. One of them is policy, and the other is really related to the auditing of procedures. And so the board approved an additional amendment to the contract for Moss Adams to do an independent third-party verification of implementation of the 112 recommendations. And that contract scope had 2 phases. The first phase was to review the 62 recommendations that were deemed implemented by district staff as of June 30, 2017. Of those 62 recommendations, Moss Adams found that 33 were implemented, 19 were partially implemented, and the remaining 10 were either not implemented as of June 30, 2017, or undetermined. The second scope already under contract with Moss Adams is the phase 2, which is the review and the verification of the remaining 50 recommendations out of the 112. And staff anticipates that that audit will commence this fiscal year. In addition, Moss Adams has provided a proposal for essentially phase 1.5, which is the review and re-verification of the phase 1 recommendations that were not deemed implemented by Moss Adams. This table is a summary of the current status of the audits, and you'll see in the column on the right-hand side really the indication of the services anticipated for this fiscal year. Many of the recommendations of the program effectiveness and the Forensic Accounting Investigation Phase 2 report call for detailed process and procedures, updates to forms, etc. And that's why in the publication of the draft program management plan, we've created audit guides for both of those audits, which then identify associated PMP locations. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Wolt. You're muted.
So that's the overview of all the different types of audits the district has done. We know that the CBOC has some other areas to add, so we would pass to them before we go into discussion.
Okay, Anton Younghair, you had a presentation. Mr. Younghair.
Yes, sir.
Okay, sorry, before you begin talking, can we put up on the screen the bond program performance audits overview?
Mr. Gosney, are you referring to Mr. Younghair's, the document?
Yes.
Okay, just one moment.
Thank you.
I apologize. I didn't have that document loaded. Just one moment, please.
Okay.
I would like to note that this presentation is a joint presentation for myself and Don Gosney.
Well, I'm not going to take credit for it till we see it on the screen.
Well, I wanted to make sure that you were associated with it in case we don't get it on the screen.
I'm close, I promise.
There we go.
All right, thank you. There's 4 items on this presentation. The first 2 relate to the item B2, so we'll only look at the first page. And then what I'd like to do is when we get to item B3, we'll look at the other 2 items on the second page. What I've done here on item 1 is quote directly from Dr. Wall's presentation, which he just made to you, which says that the bond performance audit verifies that bond proceeds are used on projects listed on the ballot measure. That was on page 4 of his presentation that he just made to you. What he didn't tell you was that there were $56 million of expenditures made in the last years on the bond program, and that the effectiveness and results of those $56 million of fiscal 2020 expenditures will not be audited. The $56 million of expenditures last year, the effectiveness and results of those expenditures will not be audited under Dr. Wall's presentation. Going on to item 2, Dr. Wall indicates that the implementation status of the 24 recommendations will be deemed fully implemented when the final program management plan is published. That's a direct quote. At best, that's a misleading statement. We know from Ms. Payne's presentation tonight that the draft plan that was presented to you tonight will be presented to the board in October. The presentation of the plan itself will not demonstrate the implementation of those 24 recommendations. The implementation of those 24 recommendations will not even be reviewed under Dr. Wall's presentation, recommendation, because they will not be part of the compliance audit. Dr. Wall has only recommended a compliance audit. It will not review whether those 24 recommendations were implemented. The fact that the program management plan provides procedures that speak to those various items does not in and of itself provide verification. Verification can only happen by an independent third-party auditor. So to suggest that publishing a plan will result in having recommendations implemented and verifiable, I think is misleading at best. Just as a historical footnote, we know that on the first phase of the forensic investigation review, of the 62 recommendations of review, almost half, some 29, were not deemed implemented by the auditor. The only thing that's useful for the CBOC and the public, which is our responsibility to present to the public how the expenditures are made, is when an independent third-party auditor verifies that the recommendations have been implemented. So I would like to suggest that the best course of action is to have a effectiveness and results audit for fiscal 2020 and the years going forward, in addition to the compliance audit, which is required. That's the end of my presentation.
Okay, if we could show by raising your hands if you have any questions or comments.
There are no public comment hands raised at this time. And I'm looking for hands on the panelist side. I do now. I see Don Gosney's.
Well, you know, I had to say something. I wanted to give everybody else a chance to speak first, though. You know, it's a shame that the full board is not here, since they'll be voting on this soon. This was important information, and that we'll be having a discussion here that could prove useful to them, because we will not be able to have a discussion when it actually comes before the board. So in this presentation, we heard that a number of recommendations that were made to staff 5 years ago have not yet been implemented or verified that they've been implemented. One of those was the need for a yearly CBOC budget. We also heard that there are 2 recommendations made in the last effectiveness audit about the board policy and the abysmal state of the CBOC website. Even though these last 2 items are repeats from previous effectiveness audits, this report says that we should expect them to be rectified a year and a half after they were recently brought back to the attention of the board. Really? Why would this report suggest that these 2 will be rectified by July 1 of next year, when they have absolutely no way of controlling what the next board will do with them? The CBOC budget issue has been ongoing year after year. With all 3 of these issues, the CBOC has received significant pushback from staff and board to remedy the items. With the website, we even offered to do all the work. 7 of the items were so super top secret that even now the district, which includes the board, wants to hide behind attorney-client privilege, so none of us will ever know what the district did wrong. The board can waive that privilege, but they haven't. So the perception is that the board is continuing to hide these 7 items. Excuse me for being blunt, but it's difficult to grasp that the board and the people working for them take these issues as seriously as the CBOC and the public does. What we're not hearing in this presentation is an appraisal of what might happen to the interest rates we might get stuck with on future bond sales when we get another negative evaluation in an audit or in the news media. The news media doesn't give a dang about reasons or excuses. They already know all they need to know. They can afford more ink than the district can, and they have a far greater reach than the district does. If my thoughts mean anything at all, don't give our enemies the ammunition they're seeking to bring us down. This is a district that can really use some help in public relations. Going with a performance audit that includes effectiveness and results is the smart thing to do. The minimal cost up front is far less than the potential negative costs when the public loses even more faith in the people running the district. The people running this district don't live here, and I don't believe they've had an opportunity to meet with regular people, not just parents, but the many tens of thousands of taxpayers who don't have kids in our district, but get to pay for these new schools for the rest of their lives. They don't hear the concerns that our neighbors express in meetings and on social media. The bottom line is that they just don't trust anyone associated with our school district. So when we have documented issues with the bond program that have been on the books for nearly 5 years, and you tell them that they should trust the district to get them resolved in a year, maybe you can understand why they have so little faith. Very few of the board members and senior staff were here when many of these issues first came to light, but every effort should have been made as soon as the district became aware of them to get them resolved. It should never have taken 5 years and longer. Let's keep in mind that many of these issues stem from the forensic accounting investigation, and long before we saw the final version back in September of 2016, staff was made aware of these issues. They should have resolved as many issues as they could, so when the FAI came before the board and the public, senior staff could have stepped forward to announce that these problems no longer existed because they had been resolved. But even had they made that announcement, what good would it have done when their claims could not be validated? They're still validating those claims from 5 years ago. Until we get an effectiveness and results performance audit in our hands that gives us a clean bill of health, this community of taxed to death neighbors deserves the kind of audit that will bring into the sunlight the deficiencies of our program. Won't you please help you to get the good people of West County to say that they trust the district? And by the way, when you look at the cost of the of the effectiveness and results audit. Don't be swayed by the high cost shown to you in these presentations. The cost of the performance audit has nothing to do with the financial audit, so why include it? And the basic compliance audit is given too. And don't give any more weight to that part of the performance audit that validates that the district told us the truth when they said that what they did was true. That has to be done no matter what. Look at the cost for the additional effectiveness and results audit as a standalone item. And now look at the number of hundreds of millions of dollars being spent and has to be accounted for. And lastly, when we looked at the 2016 Nixon Peabody letter, the one that was kept hidden from the CBOC, even though I asked for it at every CBOC meeting for 16 months straight. It says that it looked at nearly 450 task orders to determine which could be paid for from the bond program and which from the general fund. I recently asked to see those. Anton Younger made a public records request so he could see them. As it turns out, absolutely no one can produce these. There's just a piece of history that has disappeared. One of my reasons for wanting to see those is so we could see what was involved with these task orders. For instance, if one was to sharpen a pencil and another was to build a new high school, should they be given the same weight when determining what percentage should come from a specific fund? Now that we know that the numbers used in the Nixon Peabody letter are no longer valid, Dr. Wold is free to recalibrate the percentage so possibly more of the cost of the effectiveness and results audit can be paid for by using bond funds. And even though we heard in detail about the 112 recommendations from the forensic accounting investigation, what we really didn't hear about very much was the 50 or 60 recommendations that have come up in performance audits that still have to be resolved. And these are ongoing. Some of them have and some of them have not. So it's not as simple as just saying that we've got 102 out of the 112 original recommendations taken care of. There are more that have come up since then, and I bet that if there was an investigation right now, an effectiveness and results audit, they might find even more. But we got a great staff right now. I have complete faith in this staff, I really do. But we need to get this all behind us so we have a clean slate to work from. And we can't do that if we just get a bare bones. It's what I refer to as the Walmart.com version. You know, fill in your own blanks here. It's a generic form. It's cheap, but you get what you pay for. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions or comments?
There was one more hand up, Trustee Panis.
That's outstanding.
Thank you very much. We are, depending on how you count, about the 25th largest school district in the state. At the same time, we have the 3rd largest bond program in the state. And I think the fact that our citizens have made such an extraordinary vote of confidence and investment in our schools calls for a very high level of transparency and oversight. I'm in favor of having a program effectiveness and results audit every year. This will tell the taxpayers what they need to know, make it clear that we are providing for the full transparency and accountability of the process, and keep everyone on their toes. I think we owe this to our community. I'm also in favor of the phase 1.5 audit. And I'd just like to note that, we have had a number of the items on the list tested by our internal audit staff. The standard of practice of the National Institute of Auditors Association is that the auditor works for the board. And since our internal audit staff works for the superintendent, they are not independent, and therefore we cannot say we're having these independently verified. So thank you very much.
So staff absolutely believes that we do need some change in the way audits are done in the state. The performance audit itself is not anywhere near an effectiveness audit. The reality is we should be jointly pursuing legislation to have that performance audit scope changed to be an effectiveness audit for all bonds in all districts. The only difference between what we're both talking about is we believe that, to quote what Don Gosney just said, we have so many things that are still in that unresolved era. We have Moss Adams under contract to do the phase 2. Staff is in support of adding scope to that contract to try to finalize and validate the other pieces so that we can finish this year with a true listing of anything that we have not been able to validate or we deem still needs to be focused on, that becomes the scope. Moving forward, we have a whole new bond program, Measure R to Start. We want to make sure that we start that program with a clean operational piece. As we stated before, none of us at the senior staff level were here when that first audit started. We were not part of that process. It's our job to not allow those issues that may have arisen from the past to continue. And Melissa and the team and Lewis have certainly put in the process and procedures. What we're asking and what we're recommending is that we validate this year everything that's remaining, get a final tally sheet, for no better term, of anything that's outstanding, and that becomes the scope for what we do moving forward. Simultaneously, I believe that we jointly communicate to the state powers that the current format of audits is not the most appropriate way to look at how citizens' bond funds are being spent, and that there should be a reconfiguration of the requirements of a performance audit. Our issue is, if we were to do a third audit, based on the fact that that Nixon Peabody is not usable as a document to say this is 60% funded this way or that way, until we know the exact scope of what we're doing, we cannot give the board definitive answer on whether it's fundable through the bond or through general fund. And the board does need, for every fiscal decision the board is asked us for, is to bring forward the fiscal impact. The best way to do that is finalize, get all of the recommendations, create an RFP with a specific scope, have that scope evaluated by bond counsel for the appropriateness of funding. We do also have one other issue that we have to maintain, and there's a 3.5% ratio as it pertains to expenses. And we're not over that ratio yet, but we want to make sure we never do, because every dollar that we spend on something not putting shovels into the ground is a dollar taken away from the facilities long term. So again, we do agree with the CBOC's concerns. We do agree that we need to get to finality for these. We do agree that it's been 5 years. That's our goal, is to try to close out as many as we can moving forward. I see President Hernandez-Jarvis with her hand up, so we will stop at this point.
Thank you. And Trustee Panas, you completed your question and comment as well, right? Okay, thank you. Just checking. So thank you for the presentation again, Ms. Payne, Dr. Wold, and Mr. Gosney, and Mr. Youngair as well. I guess you were talking a little bit about this right now, Dr. Wold, about the implementations being verified, the implementations of the recommendations being verified by a third party or an independent auditor. So you said that once I guess what I'm trying to figure out is the timeline. When is it that the goal is to have these recommendations and their implementations verified?
Currently, we have Moss Adams under contract to do that phase 2, the 50. If there's other items that we believe need to be part of that validation, we can certainly add scope to that independent evaluation. Our goal is to have everything completed by June of this school year, so that we can then, as we move into the next audit cycle, define an RFP appropriately over the following summer, jointly put in those scope if that is the direction the board wishes to go, and staff will make that recommendation to the board. Should there be even one item not validated, it will be our recommendation to move forward with another independent audit to go down that pathway. Our only difference between everything that we're talking about here is we would like to try to close out the things that we all inherited to the best of our ability and start on that clean slate. And I see Don Gosney has his hand up as well.
Thank you, Dr. Wold. So I guess my follow-up to that is then, are you saying that essentially not until next summer, potentially, we won't have these verified by an actual independent auditor? Because that's kind of what I heard right now, and I just want to make sure that I clarify that.
Correct. The 50 items are under scope to be done this year by Moss Adams, and Melissa can jump in if I'm incorrect in what.
Okay, but, and I guess my question is also, so the ones that have been already implemented, the recommendations that have been implemented as of the closing of the financial year on the 30th of 2020, June 30th. So that, I mean, those are not going to be verified either until the next 50 are done?
Melissa, I'm not sure that I'm.
Unless I'm asking it incorrectly, but I guess I'm a little bit confused about that because I know that there's 50 left to still implement fully, but I'm trying to figure out, have the other 62 then been fully verified by an independent auditor?
Okay, so that was the chart. There were some that were verified. There were a couple that did not get, and that's sort of where I believe Trustee Panis was referring back to 1.5 in a sense that these were part of one and they're sort of out in this limbo land now because we deemed there was a staff recommendation deeming them to be implemented, but it wasn't verified. And so one option is to look at adding those to that scope with Moss Adams this year, not another audit. You just get into the verification of those items because our goal is to come back in June with all items either verified or not verified, and then a plan of action to move forward.
So then,
whichever way those are.
Thank you for explaining that. So then what we're looking at is a timeline that will span the actual, through this entire financial and school year. Together.
Correct.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
And Don Gosney has his hand up.
Yes, I do. Thank you very much. And I support any kind of legislative changes that might be appropriate, but we all know that's not going to affect what we got in front of us today.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't happen that quickly. And that's what we're worried about right now. Legislative changes is tomorrow's problem. Let's take care of today's problem. And I know that in this discussions at the facilities meetings and at the CBOC and even with some of the presentations to the board, that there was a discussion about putting out an RFP and queue for a compliance audit. That is all that is required by statute. And then possibly coming out with another RFP for either the same or an additional auditor to do the effectiveness and results. Now, I have a concern about that because it doesn't seem like it's an efficient use of our resources, either our staff time or our money. And the example I give, I think I may have said it before, is if you want to wash a car and you got some neighborhood kids, you don't hire one group of kids to wash the roof and the hood, another group to wash the sides, and then a third group to wash the tires and the grill. You have one group that does it all because it's more efficient to do it, because you got people stepping over each other, and especially when it's shorthanded on staff, you can't afford to have your staff all the time just getting the same kind of documents, for multiple auditors. To me, it just makes sense to have one auditor do it all. At least go in there with that proposal, especially if you're going to send out RFQs. Include that as an option. I mean, you can go ahead and have the compliance. You can have the effectiveness and results, but have a compliance, effective results auditor in the mix as well. So you can go before the board with here's plan A, plan B, plan C. Which one do you want? Thank you.
There are two more hands that have come up. Sally DeWitt's hand was first.
Okay, I want to clarify, Dr. Wold, that you are asking that an effectiveness and results performance audit not be done on fiscal year 2020. And so that you can spend that time, as I understand it, completing all the recommendations that you have in hand so far on the list. What I see as a risk is that you will get to fiscal year 2021 and not be aware of certain things that would have come up if you had done the effectiveness and results 2020. Therefore, your risk of having a not clean audit in 2021 is higher than it otherwise would be. And I don't know if that risk is worth it to you, because you are putting a lot of emphasis on trust of the public in light of Measure R, And I very much appreciated what Trustee Panis said. I would certainly like to hear, and Trustee Hernandez-Jarvis. I supported much of that. And I just want to reiterate what Don Gosney said, which is, as a member of the public, I personally cannot hang my hat on anything except a third-party verification. So I'm looking very much for a clean audit, and you risk having a not clean audit in 2021 if you go forward like this.
And we appreciate that. If you actually look at what work is being done right now, the major project that is finishing up is Michelle Obama. That started last year, and that's within scope of both the performance audit and within the financial audit. In addition, that project layered back to the previous effectiveness audit as well. So Moss Adams will be doing the verification of those 50 items. So we will be having a third audit this fiscal year because we have the verification going on. If we were to add another effectiveness audit, we would actually be doing 4 audits in the current year. We'd be cleaning up the previous, doing the natural performance audit, doing the natural financial audit, and doing a new effectiveness audit. Our recommendation is spend the resources this year cleaning up. There's not a new project that's jumping out that's going to be happening during this fiscal year. That's going to be a significant expenditure. The next runs will be hitting in the next fiscal year, the 21-22. That's where we want to have everything cleaned up and really focused on the next big spends that are dollars for both Measure D and E, those dollars, and Measure R, because you're going to start having projects cross measures with the dollars remaining within. So it's just a matter of efficiencies. It's not a matter of creating additional risk. It truly is. We feel like this district's been chasing these for 4 to 5 years, and every year you get a little bit done and you leave a little more behind. We would like to finally not leave things behind and have a starting point that everyone's on the same page. That's the only difference in the recommendation. There was one more hand there, so I took a time. Lorraine Hughes had raised her hand.
Yes. I just wanted to speak to the question about the confusion of what the forensic investigation audit, what the different stages are. What happened was you had 112 recommendations from your initial audit. Then the board said, all right, we've fixed 62 of them. We think we've implemented 62. So they went to Moss Adams and they said, now Moss Adams, we've got 62 of them done and there's still 50 left. So let's make a contract where you look at those 62 and then when the remaining 50 are done, you'll look at those. And so that's what your contract is. But when Moss Adams looked at the first 62, they did not agree that they were all implemented. They said 33 have been implemented according to our standards. 29 of them need to be implemented. Those 29 are not under a contract at all. They're sitting out in the Netherlands. So that's what you've got to write another contract, hopefully with the PMP and the work that Melissa's group has done. You're going to have to get another contract with Moss Adams, come back and look at those 29. But just keep in mind, when you finish the remaining 50, Moss Adams or whoever you're going to audit it may come in and say, well, we think you've only done 25 of them. So it could be a 4th contract you might have to go out with.
That's what we're saying. That's exactly what we're agreeing may indeed occur, that if it is the direction of the board to augment the current Moss Adams contract to add those 29, that would be understandable, because again, then we would be able to bring the 79 forward. If 20 are remaining at the end, then there becomes the initial start of our scope. Yeah. This is not to deny or hide from anything. In fact, it's the opposite. We want exactly what the CBOC wants. We want to close these out and move forward.
And from the facilities department, we would support the
Right.
0.5.
Right. And I think Mr. Youngair had a comment, and I think Mr. Freeze was talking right now. Your microphone was really low. Your I'm sorry, not your microphone, your audio. I don't know if you can get closer to the.
Yeah, so I think what we were saying is that the facilities department would support Dr. Wold's recommendation of implementing phase 1.5 audit for the forensic audit, which would re-audit the 29 items and close out with the 50 during this current fiscal year.
Yeah, so just to repeat for those that can't hear, both facilities and business are very much in support of augmenting the current Moss Adams contract, should that be the direction of the board. To do so, we would then go and have them do a change order, for no better term, to that contract to expand that scope to those other 29 items, with the goal that we've been recommending. We want to get to as much closure as we can, and those that we can't, we want to get those identified and get direction for those of us that are now new here to go, okay, now we have a clear pathway of what we have to go forward. Because right now we believe many of those 29 and of the 50 are going to be resolvable in this year, especially because of the production of the PMP that we just saw. So I only saw Anton had his hand up, and that there are no other hands after that.
I do not have the raise hand feature. Should I be able to see that on my?
It should be down in participants, and then you can click, you should be able to do raise hand from there.
Yeah, it doesn't have that option.
Okay, well,
Oh,
I'll
yeah,
keep my eyes on you if your hand goes up.
Oh, it does have that option. I'm sorry, it's down the bottom. Okay, I got it. Dr. Wall represents that they're doing, or that staff is doing what the CBOC is recommending is disingenuous. And I think it's really confusing because we're talking about performance audit. At the same time, we're talking about the forensic review, which is the next item on the agenda. So you're putting the two items together, mixing them all up, and it gets very confusing. What I'd like to suggest is we stay on the performance audit, which is agenda item B2. And the reality is that the $56 million of expenditures that were made in fiscal 2020 will not be reviewed with effectiveness and results audit. That's the reality under the proposal of Dr. Wall. He talks about the scope. The CBOC has recommended that the scope be determined by the auditors in accordance with the government auditing standards for an effective and results audit. Therefore, when he argues we have to wait to see what we need for the scope is immaterial. Under effectiveness and results audit, under the yellow book, which is the government auditing standard, the auditor, not the district, the auditor determines the scope. That is what we're going to not have. We will not have a scope audit determined by the auditor of the $56 million of expenditures made in fiscal 2020. In regards to his suggestion that perhaps that should be made statewide, as you know, or perhaps you do know, that a state agency called the Little Hoover Commission made that same recommendation. In fact, the CBOC made that recommendation to the school board that you support that legislative change. In regards to the funding for the audit, a request has been made to the California Attorney General in regards to the funding. The California Attorney General has issued a Attorney General Opinion 04-110 on this very subject, including funding for performance audits. So that issue will be resolved by the Attorney General. The bottom line is that under Dr. Wall's proposal, you will not audit the $56 million effectiveness and results for fiscal 2020. But the most important thing is, what he doesn't tell you, is that the 24 recommendations made in last year's effectiveness and result audit will not be followed up. They will not be determined if they have been implemented. So there are 24 performance audit objectives made from fiscal 2021, fiscal 2019, that under Dr. Wall's proposal will not be reviewed. So not only will you not review the 56 million for the current fiscal 2020, you will not review the implementation of the prior year 24. Now, Dr. Wall, is what I said correct? Did I say anything there that was incorrect?
So it's a matter of how that 56 million is being evaluated. The request of the CBOC is that it's reviewed under an effectiveness audit. It is being reviewed under the financial audit and under the performance audit guidelines. However, the request is for the type of review that it's undergoing. And that's the difference with it. All of the different actions will overlap. It's very unlikely that there's some brand new change in, because that's an overlapping program, the Michelle Obama program. It started in the previous year. So it's very unlikely that all of a sudden, miraculously, a new change in procedure occurred in the middle of that project. But we do understand the question that Mr. Younger is presenting. Is it being audited under the standard that he's requesting? The answer is no. It's being audited under the financial standard and under the performance standard.
And is it correct that there'll be no follow-up on the 24 recommendations made by Moss Adam last year?
I believe that Melissa Payne in her presentation actually discussed some of that follow-up already.
Right, and it is correct that that under your proposal, they will not be reviewed by an independent auditor. Is that correct?
They are not initially added as scope necessary to be brought forward for specific review. They are reviewed by our internal auditor.
Yes.
Again, these were not major issues there, and all but two, I believe, were already resolved. Is that correct, Melissa?
They have not been resolved, sir, by an independent third party, and has also already been represented that your director of internal audit is not independent because she works for the superintendent and not for the board under standards, under national standards for audit. So you cannot represent that having Ms. Bromo look at those things is an independent review. And I think you should stop representing that because that's basically improper and incorrect.
If I may add, thank you, Dr. Walden. Thank you, Mr. Younger. I want us to keep track of time. It's 7:39, and we have one more discussion item that we need to get to. So, Mr. Gosney, if you are ready to move on, we can go to the next discussion item.
Actually, I'm not. I wanted to finish out with a comment, then we can move on. One of the problems that we've got is we don't just need to be on the up and up with everything that we need that we're doing. We need to have the appearance of propriety. That's what helps build faith from the public. And when you've got an internal auditor that we're saying is independent that actually works for the superintendent, meaning she's not independent, okay, that's a bit of a problem. But, please don't take this the wrong way, because as I say, I've got complete faith in our senior staff. But we're talking about auditing the actions of those senior staff, and the senior staff is saying, let's go with the bare bones audit of overlooking what we've done. That does not give the people that warm and fuzzy feeling. Sometimes it's a matter of having to step back and say, you're absolutely right. We need to have somebody look at what we've done to be able to say without a doubt in anybody's mind, I said that the money has been properly spent. And with that, we will close this out, and I'll go ahead and turn things back to you, President Hernandez-Jarvis.
Thank you, Mr. Gosney. And I want to say that we definitely hear the concerns, and it would be great for the staff to continue to work with the CBOC so that this can be brought to the full board for our attention. Thank you. So we just finished the second discussion item, B2, and now the third discussion item. The last discussion item is B3, status of verifications of the implementation of forensic accounting investigation recommendations. Mr. Freeze.
Yes.
Good evening. So, on behalf of the Implementation Task Force, which was one of the recommendations that was made in the forensic accounting investigation, of which the membership is listed here, the Implementation Task Force is made up of our superintendent, our associate superintendent of operations, that's Mr. Freeze, our associate superintendent of business services, Dr. Wold, our internal auditor, Ms. Romo, myself, CBOC representative, Mr. Moore, and currently there is a vacant solution team member spot. So on behalf of our task force, I present to you a little bit of background and just an update on where we are. And in the interest of time, I'll be brief on this slide because I think we've talked about this in the second item. And so essentially, there are 112 recommendations. There's a task force that reviews the implementation of these items. There's an additional third-party independent review by Moss Adams of these recommendations. The remaining 50 recommendations per contract was scheduled to begin the verification upon the completion of the recommendations. And that really brings us to what are the recommendations that are remaining. So as was briefly touched on in the presentation of the program management plan, there is an audit guide that's been prepared that is included in the program management plan that speaks to the recommendations. There are essentially 10 recommendations left, and these are the recommendations that remain. And so they fall into essentially the categories that were shared, and that includes board policy and the auditing of recommendations. So I think it's worth noting that when BLS prepared the forensic accounting investigation, what they did was there were a couple of recommendations where they said, once this is implemented, then audit vendor contracting. Once this has been implemented, then audit the vendor invoice rejection process. And so there are a series of recommendations that have to do with the auditing of the procedures, which will be done by Ms. Romo, but in addition will also be done by the third-party independent auditor, Moss Adams. The policy items are the district business ethics expectation policy, which I know Dr. Wold is working on. And also there's the board policy for the CBOC. And so the other thing that I would share just very quickly, which is included in the agenda packet, is in addition to providing this presentation, we also prepared, sorry, give me 1 second. It's hard to share and talk at the same time. We have also prepared an extended summary. So are you guys able to see the extended summary that I just shared that has a green border?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I don't get to see what you get to see. So what we've done here is we have two. So for item 2, which we were discussing, which was about the program effectiveness, here is the summary. And then for the forensic, sorry, apologies, it's hard to do both on one screen. For the forensic accounting investigation, sorry, I can't see. Can you guys see the forensic accounting investigation phase 2 report right now or no?
We can't.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm sorry, I have lost control of my screen. So in the interest of time, I'll just say that attached to the agenda for this item is a summary of the forensic accounting investigation. And what we did was we added 2 columns, and those columns included the summary of the implementation status deemed by the district as well as the Moss Adams status. And so it'll indicate, for example, if in phase 1 they deemed it partially implemented or not implemented as of June 30, 2017, and also if it's part of phase 2. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation and try to get the screen to work.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Payne. And if you can get it to work, it would be great to see it. If not, maybe Mr. Jordan or someone can help to get that on the screen. And if you have any questions or comments, or first let's do public comment. If you are an attendee, make sure that you raise your hand by pressing *9 if you're calling in, or raise your hand via the Zoom app.
There are no public hands. There are 2 panelist hands so far. I believe I saw Lorraine's hand first, then Don Gosney's.
Okay.
Thank you.
As far as the high risk items, you had 10 items that you said you had to work on. 5 of them were high risk. At our meetings, we had been assured that these were going to be taken care of right away because of the importance of them. However, in the case of the board policy for the CBOC, the board has tabled that several times. We've gone to the governance committee. Dr. Wald sent the suggestions to the lawyer and he agreed with some of the things we would like to add in there. And yet the board tables it again. It's been years we've been trying to get this done. What kind of commitment do you have to do that? I'm asking the board members to get through with this and take care of the policy.
I can answer. I think that we have had the CBOC board policy come to us in governance throughout the last 2 years. You know, it's been something that has been coming to us, and that we've looked at it, we've had discussion, we've gone back, we've had conversation, and staff brings changes, and then checks in with Mr. Gosney and the CBOC. And so I think that we've taken it to the full board, if I'm not mistaken, twice now. Maybe it was actually once, maybe it was twice. But I know that there hasn't been enough support from the majority of the board to get it going forward. So I'm open to taking a look at it again and bringing it, if we have to governance again, to work on it some more, and then taking it to the full board. Trustee Panas, I don't know if you want to also comment, and Trustee Lara, I saw your hand up. Trustee Lara, and then Trustee Panas, if you have anything that you'd like to add as well to Ms. Hume's question.
And we have several other hands after that as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm very interested in examining this policy, because we need to start seriously looking at, you know, systemic inequities that we have in the district, our lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how that looks on the CBOC. And I think that's a real serious conversation we need to have, and what is preventing diversity, equity, and inclusion. For instance, the term limits practice, the appointment process. We need to get some real strict guidelines to that, so that we can open it up and actually have diversity, equity, and inclusion. Being on the CBOC is not a Supreme Court appointment. So I think there's some real serious changes that need to be made. So President Hernandez-Jarvis, I hope we will put that on the agenda for discussion. Thank you very much.
So in order, it's Don Gosney, then Mac Moore, and then I'll tell the next afterwards.
Thank you. And if Dr. Wold, if we can hold on 1 second, I wanted to check if Trustee Panas had anything to add, since he serves on the governance committee as well.
I don't have too much to add. Just like we have had a number of discussions about this, you know, we've had a unanimous recommendation out of the governance that this be adopted by the board, and the board members have not chosen to support it. So.
Thank you, Trustee Panas. Dr. Wold?
Don Gosney?
Thank you very much. Since we're still on the issue of the board policy, so we don't seem to have a consensus from the board. I've tried and tried and tried and tried to be able to speak with the board members to try to figure out what their issues are. And for the most part, I've just been rebuffed on that. So at this time, I think, since we're talking about a board that has only got a couple of months left, that this is an issue that may be best to come back when we've got some people that are more willing to discuss things with us, with a new board on there. I said, but the main reason I wanted to talk is at one of the slides that were shown were the 10 items from the FAI, and just items number 77 and 78 about the Ivy League connection, ILC, it says there. I met with Dr. Wold and Louis Fries yesterday about that, since I am the Ivy League connection, and I believe that we've got those resolved. So between the three of us, we just knocked out 20% of them. Thank you.
And we're working to get that in, if not this Friday's letter, next Friday's letter.
Thank you, Mr.
So
Gosney.
the next one was Mac Moore.
Thank you. I guess this is more of a question for Melissa and for Tony. So if we look at what remains to be done, is it correct that after the PMP is presented and approved by the board, in theory, if we set aside the board policy points that we're just talking about, we could start the review, have the auditor come in and review all the remaining items, including if we choose the so-called 1.5. Is that sort of a correct sense of timing, that it's really the board policy items that are having this drag out until the end of the fiscal year?
Yeah, some of those are. I can tell you that if you look on this page right here, on this next board meeting, number 76, a first reading for that policy change will be coming to also address 76. So 76, 77, and 78 are in process. So indeed, we are trying to hit everyone. We're still trying to figure out some of those secret 7 as much as everyone else to try to address those as we go forward too. So yes, you are correct. That's the goal, to be able to have that independent verification this year. And then the next hand was Guadalupe.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Hello, board members. I just have a quick comment. I think, we're in regards to the board policy, when it comes to the board policy, I think this is highlighting the importance of an active liaison on every committee that, or board that we establish, because I think a lot of, the field of the work that's being done on the CBOC, and then having to, take that up somewhere else and not even have, a lot of the concerns that are not being addressed until it hits, the board level, can actually be topics of conversations at our regular CBOC meetings. So I think really having, an active liaison during our committee meetings, during our board meetings, to actually make sure that, we're not losing track, and that there's always that back and forth communication with the work that is actually being done, because we spend a lot of hours, a lot of time, hashing out certain things to then be taken, like you said, to the different board meetings, to then just be, just turn back around and say, this work is not relevant, or we're not, directed it. So I think having, like I said, a board liaison at these meetings to be able to kind of go back and give that feedback that we need to reach consensus on the work that's being done is very important.
Thank you, Ms. Iniana.
The next hand was Trustee Panis.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this conversation very much. If we do what the staff is recommending, we will have a lot of unanswered questions. In phase, as we've heard, in phase 1 of the review, Moss Adams reviewed 62 items and reported that 29 recommendations, also almost half the total, had not been properly implemented or fully implemented. So that's obviously a concern. If we do as staff recommends, we will not know if the 20-odd performance recommendations, performance audit recommendations made in March of 2020 will ever be verified as implemented by an independent auditor. And I just feel that all these questions need to be answered now, given the scope of the projects that we're about to begin under Measure R. It's an enormous amount of money, and I just think we need to be willing to do everything we can to show the public that we're going to be really careful with the money they so generously given to us, or willing to give to us, and finish these things up the right way with all the audits as I've been suggesting earlier in the meeting. So thank you very much.
Thank you. The next hand up is Anton Junger.
I'd like to speak to the lack of a board policy. This has been gone over 2.5 years that this has been trying to be amended. The purpose of the amendments is to make clear that the CBOC is an independent oversight committee established by state law, not established by the school district. Trustee Laura has made her position clear that the CBOC should not be independent. So she reviews the proposed amendments to the board policy in that vein. I don't understand what Trustee Laura is talking about in terms of diversity and inclusion. As you know, the Education Code provides 5 mandated positions on the CBOC, including business, taxpayers, senior citizens, and 2 parent positions. So I'm not sure what she means by diversity and inclusion. When she speaks to term limits, the term limits are provided for in the Ed Code, which are 2-year terms for 3 consecutive terms on a particular committee. I think what's should be noted as the current selection process for the CBOC was a result of a 2015 grand jury report, which outlined recommendations in regards to the selection process, which were not previously adhered to. And that included providing applications to the superintendent and the chair of the CBOC, provided for provided for public interviews by the facilities committee and recommendations from the facility committee to the board. That all was the result of the grand jury report. So, Trustee Laura, it would be helpful to me if you could explain to me what your issue is in terms of diversity and inclusion.
So the
I don't have
next
a
hand
comment about that right now. That would take a long discussion.
the next hand that I see is Lorraine Hughes, and
Yeah.
that's the last hand up.
I also want to address what Trustee Laura mentioned about diversity. We have 9 members on the committee. We have 6 vacancies on the committee. And I think maybe a good answer in order to get more diversity might be for the school board, maybe this one or the next one, to work with the CBOC. We need representatives for El Cerrito, Pinole, San Pablo, 2 unincorporated area representatives, and a parent or guardian representative. So maybe we can work together to get enough people in the pool that we will have diversity. That's all.
I do not, oh wait, I see one last hand. No, I see no hands.
Okay, thank you.
President,
Thank you, Ms. Humes, Mr. Younger, and Trustee Lara. I have just one note. I definitely agree that the CBOC board policy needs to come back to the board, and I think that it may be wise to bring it, I mean, I wouldn't mind bringing it back to the board that we have now, but the likelihood of it actually being approved is low, I think, from what we have seen. So I think it makes sense to bring it once we have the new board as well. And on page, let me find the page very quickly, page 4 of the presentation, there's a pie chart. And I noticed that there are some numbers that are a little bit off, and I think it was maybe just a small unintentional error. But in the yellow area that says in progress on the pie chart itself, it marks as 12 being in progress, and that's 10.7%. But if you look at the total that is in the square next to it to describe it, it's 10 actual items that are itemized there. So I think that's either supposed to be a 10 or a 12, and there's 2 items missing from the in progress description. And then for the blue part of the pie chart, it says implemented and ready for review, 60 recommendations, but then it says 58, and then that would be 51.8%. So I just wanted to call that because it's 2 that are either misplaced or the number was written wrong. And I just wanted to call that to your attention so that when the public sees it, they see it accurately. So if that can be fixed, that would be great. Do I have the right info?
What I would recommend is, as Dr. Wold is preparing the Friday memo that's going to be updating the status of item number 76, and with Mr. Gosney's announcement about items 77 and 78, that in that Friday memo, we can provide an update on the status of the recommendations implemented and the recommendations that remain outstanding.
Great.
To reflect all
And
of
so
those updates.
that may come, I'm not sure that we'll finish it for this Friday. It'll definitely come next Friday as we're moving forward.
Thank you. That is my comment on this and my request. Is there anybody else before we finish and go on to comments from Mr. Gosney and myself? I don't see any more hands. Okay,
No
so
hands.
Mr. Gosney, thank you.
I'm sorry, I heard my name, but I didn't hear what you were doing with it.
So we just finished wrapping up item B3, status
Yes.
of implementation of the FAI recommendations, the forensic accounting investigation. So now we're moving on to item C, comments from board president, CBOC chairperson. So if you have any closing comments that you'd like to make.
Well, it's been a year since we've had this meeting, so I've been holding up my comments. So yes, I do. First, I want to thank everyone participating in there. I've counted at peak 39 people present between the CBOC and the board members. That made up 13 of them, and then we had, well, no, you lost 2 of your board members, so that's only 11. Then you had a bunch of staff people, but you had a lot of public people. That's always a good thing. I like seeing that. You know, after a year without the option to meet as a combined group where we could discuss areas of concern, it was good to meet tonight. Members of the board and senior staff have expressed numerous times that they see no need for these joint meetings and would rather do away with them in their entirety. We understand that even before we invited Zoom into our lives back in March, we were being meeting to death. Sometimes we want to throw up our arms and shout out that we just want to get back to work. That sitting in yet another meeting for hours on end doesn't accomplish anything. And there's a lot of truth to that. When community issues come before the board, interested neighbors might try to lobby members of the board, but they're stuck trying to email their concerns. Board members are so busy that they rarely pick up their phones when called, and they may take them weeks to return the calls. And they don't always have time to check their emails or reply back to the people expressing their concerns. We might attend the board meeting ready to voice our 2 minutes or less, but even when we speak, we don't always feel that we're being listened to. All of that, though, is dependent on us actually getting a chance to speak. The past couple of board meetings, I've had to resort to using my time understanding reports as an opportunity to go on record and possibly be heard. When the agenda is twisted around so our items are now at near the end of the meeting, it's discouraging. And then when near midnight, the items get deferred, we lose hope and we lose interest. Sitting through the 4 to 5 hours of a board meeting only to be told to come back in a couple of weeks can be very discouraging. So when we have an item as complex as the bond program performance audit that we had tonight, and we're limited to 2 minutes to speak, it's tough to get our points across. But at these joint meetings, even though we still have a limited time for each item, at least we're not staring into a clock. That's a big deal, believe me. And we're actually allowed to have a discussion where there can be a back and forth interchange of ideas. This is actually a good thing. We need to do it more frequently than once per year. And once again, understanding the limitations on the board's time and their interest in meeting with community groups like the Bond Oversight Committee, limiting the agenda to only 3 items, limiting the meeting time to only 2 hours, and having staff decide that 2 of the 3 items will be theirs, once again, it's difficult to embrace. Knowing that before we can talk about an issue that's been a concern for us for the past year or more, we'll still have to wait another year or longer, it makes us all wonder if and when we'll ever be able to resolve those issues of concern. But we met tonight, and we're grateful for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gosney. And I want to thank all the staff that worked on this. Especially thank you, Ms. Payne and Mr. Freezer. I know that wearing your mask and giving a presentation cannot be an easy task, so I really want to commend you for that as well. And I just want to reiterate that, you know, we will continue to work together as much time as we have together as you know, with this board, and then to continue to support you, and, you know, once we're serving in the community as community members. And I want to wish everybody the best as we continue to move into the last 2 days of week 7 of distance learning. Let's continue to do our part to stop the spread of COVID and decrease it in our county by following social distancing guidelines and washing our hands frequently and wearing our masks, as Ms. Payne and Mr. Freeze demonstrated today. So thank you all. I think I froze. I'm sorry. Did I freeze right now?
No.
No? Okay. Okay, well, my screen
Now you're freezing.
freeze. Okay. Well, thank you so much. That was my closing remark. Thank you to the CBOC members, to staff, to the community members who are present with us. I look forward to continuing this work and talking about how we can support our mutual work together too. Thank you. Have a great evening, everybody, and we'll see you again next Wednesday for the regular Board of Education meeting scheduled at 6:30. I hope you
no.
Thank you.
Good night.
Night.